this lecture, we will cover an introduction to blood. The human body contains approximately 5 liters of blood. Males tend to have a little bit more, somewhere between 5 and 6 liters. Females tend to have just a little bit less, maybe 4 to 5 liters. The blood tissue, the connective tissue, makes up approximately 8% of your total body weight. So a little bit more than you would think. But if you think of how heavy a gallon of water can be, then hopefully we can kind of understand where that 8% comes from. Now, we all know that our blood circulates through the blood vessels, and your blood is made of 2 major components, your plasma and your formed elements. Plasma is the higher percentage of the total blood volume. It's about 55% of your blood. This is just a non-living fluid. It's the extracellular matrix of your blood. This is where your blood cells float around in. Your blood cells are your formed elements. That is the other 45% of your blood. This also includes cell fragments, which are what your platelets are. And then the blood cells themselves include both the red blood cells and the white blood cells. Now, everybody has been to the doctor and they have taken your blood. So when they take your blood, they put it in that little tube, they are going to spin it or centrifuge it. And this separates your blood into 3 layers, top, middle, and bottom layer. Your top layer, this is the largest layer, this is the plasma. Again, that's the 55%. The middle layer is very skinny. This is called your buffy coat. This layer is very skinny because this is your leukocytes, or your white blood cells, and your platelets. This makes up only approximately 1% of your total blood volume. And then the remaining 44%, that bottom layer, is your erythrocytes. The percentage of your erythrocytes compared to your total blood volume, this is known as hematocrit, and that is a term you are likely to see over and over again. So again, your hematocrit is just your red blood cells by volume. Now, we've already mentioned that your formed elements are your red blood cells, your white blood cells, and your platelets. Okay. So here we can see real-world examples, your red cells. Your red cells are never quite as red as you expect them to be on histological slides. They usually tend to be more of a pale pink or a pale purple. That's just the stain itself. Some of the really nicer histological images, the blood cells will actually be nice and red. Okay, so don't get thrown off if these aren't quite as red as you expect them to be. The white blood cells are very easy to spot. They are giant and they are purple, usually. We will talk about individual white cells here in a minute. And then your little tiny platelets. Okay, your platelets are involved in blood clotting. They are really just technically fragments. Okay, so it should make sense that they're much smaller compared to red and white cells. There we go. All right, we did mention the hematocrit. We're going to mention it one more time. Your hematocrit is just the percentage of your blood that is red blood cells, your erythrocytes. Now, normally we said that your red cells should equal approximately 44 to 45% of your blood by volume. Men, it's a little bit higher, 48%. Ladies, it's a little bit lower, approximately 38%. These numbers all are approximate. You know that every individual works just a little bit different. But we can calculate this percentage. So if we were to measure the height of the entire sample, okay, including all 3 layers, and then just measure the height of the red cells, okay, you can divide how tall the red cells are compared to the total height. And then if you multiply by 100, that gives you your percentage. Okay. So again, normal hematocrit should be around 45%. Now, blood has a few specific characteristics. The pH should range from 7.35 to 7.45. If we remember to way back in the day when we discussed acids and bases, you know that that makes blood just slightly basic. Okay, just slightly basic. The temperature of blood is a little bit higher than normal body temperature. Blood should be approximately 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit. We get this extra heat from not only the blood moving around in the body, but also the fluid, the plasma. We can store heat that way as well. Blood is thicker than water. I know that's a common saying, but it's also true. Blood is more viscous than water. So blood should have the consistency, not quite as thick as maple syrup, but again, not quite as thin as regular water. So kind of somewhere in between. If the blood you are dealing with is bright scarlet red, then it is well oxygenated. If the blood you are dealing with is more of a darker dull red, then it is deoxygenated blood. So we do have some variances there depending on how much oxygen we find on those red cells. Now, what is our blood good for? A couple of things. Transportation of both oxygen and carbon dioxide, as well as waste products, nutrients, and hormones that travel through the blood as well. Your blood is good for regulation. Okay, helps you carry heat. We've mentioned that. The pH does help us keep a nice internal consistency through a buffering system. Remember, we said that the normal pH of blood should be somewhere between 7.35 and 7.45 on the pH scale. There is a buffering system that allows us to help maintain that pH. And then the water within the plasma helps us maintain our blood volume, which helps us maintain our blood pressure. And last but not least, our blood does play a role in protection via our immune system. Not only do we help seal damaged blood vessels through those platelets, but those white blood cells, those leukocytes, are part of the immune system itself. Just a few more things about plasma. We have already mentioned that it should be approximately 55% of your total blood volume. 90% of that plasma is just water. We've discussed that water is a solvent, it's a good heat absorber. All of the nice things that are dissolved in the water of your plasma are also useful. Your plasma should be more of a pale yellow color. It's not clear. Okay, it should be a pale yellow. The plasma itself is what determines the viscosity of the blood. So the viscosity, we said, was how thin or how thick your blood is. If your plasma contains less water than normal, your blood would be more viscous, or it would be thicker. Okay, the more viscous your blood is, the more sluggish your blood flow, and the harder it is to move the blood through the vessels. So imagine trying to move maple syrup through your blood vessels. It's not going to go very fast. So we don't want our blood to get too viscous or it doesn't flow very well. Now, all of those nice dissolved solutes in the plasma are useful, but we do have some other things that flow through your plasma that aren't necessarily dissolved. We've got glucose, amino acids, hormones, enzymes, vitamins, gases, wastes. 100 or more solutes are carried through the plasma. Okay, those solutes were another up to 9% of that plasma volume comes from. One of the most important solutes that we will be discussing are albumins. Okay, globulins or your immunoglobulins play a role in your immune defense system, and then clotting proteins like fibrinogen. These plasma proteins, specifically albumin, play a role in something called blood osmotic pressure, or BOP. Okay, I love saying BOP. All right, so now you know what BOP is, blood osmotic pressure. We are going to talk a lot about blood osmotic pressure when we talk about your cardiovascular system. So just kind of keep in mind albumin, BOP, albumin, BOP. Okay, that last little 1%, okay, of your plasma volume, that is the dissolved, really, really tiny molecules of the plasma itself. Now, I keep telling you, albumin, BOP. Look, I put it in bold, put it in red. It's important. Okay. The albumin coming, it actually comes from your liver. So your liver produces albumin, and then we ended up putting it in the blood. So what is BOP? What is blood osmotic pressure? Okay, sometimes you'll hear it termed colloid osmotic pressure or COP. Okay, that's fine. I just like BOP instead. So here's what it does. It draws water into the blood from your interstitial fluid. It does this by osmosis. Okay, so you have fluid in between the cells of your tissues, that interstitial fluid, and we have ways to draw some of that fluid back into our cells so the fluids don't just accumulate in your interstitial space. Otherwise, you'd end up with edema. We don't like that. We don't want that. So those albumin proteins in the blood help draw some of that water back into your blood vessels. And then we did mention the immune proteins, the immunoglobulins or the gamma globulins. You have probably heard these termed antibodies. Okay, so we mentioned that they played a role in your immune system. Most people can associate antibodies with their immune system. Transport proteins, some molecules have a harder time moving through your blood than others. If you are a lipid-based molecule, it's more difficult for you to float around in the water-based plasma, so we have transport proteins that help you move around. And then clotting proteins like the fibrinogen that work with the platelets to stop you bleeding if you've damaged a blood vessel. All the pictures in the way. Cirrhosis. All right, so cirrhosis. Cirrhosis, many people have heard of cirrhosis, but maybe not necessarily understand what's going on. So let's talk real quick. Cirrhosis is a liver disease. Okay. Several different things can cause cirrhosis. Most people associate alcoholism with cirrhosis, and that is one cause, but cancer can cause cirrhosis. Certain types of viral hepatitis can also cause cirrhosis, so we can't just jump to conclusions. Okay. Now, what happens if you suffer from cirrhosis? Well, your liver is being damaged, so your liver is not producing adequate numbers of those plasma proteins that we just mentioned. Okay, specifically the albumin. Okay, so your colloid osmotic pressure, your blood osmotic pressure, your BOP. Okay, y'all are gonna so tired of hearing me say BOP. I don't care. Your BOP decreases, so you are less able to bring interstitial fluid back into your blood vessels. Well, if you can't bring that fluid back into your blood vessels, where does it stay? It stays in the extracellular spaces, and you get edema. Okay? Now, specifically, one of the side effects of cirrhosis, you end up with edema of the abdomen. We call that ascites. Okay, so it's not uncommon to see somebody's abdomen or their belly really, really swollen if they're suffering from cirrhosis, and you'll see that in order to drain that, we've just got to poke a needle in there and just drain that fluid off. Now, one of the other side effects, if you're not making enough albumin, you're probably also not going to make enough clotting factors either. And so if you do damage yourself, you bruise a lot easier. If you break a blood vessel, it could take longer for you to clot. So depending on how badly you damaged yourself, the reduction in clotting factors could end up being fatal. And then another common symptom of cirrhosis is jaundice. So as your liver begins to fail, it no longer breaks down bilirubin properly, and it builds up, and that gives you the yellow appearance. It's most easily seen in the eyes because the scleras are supposed to be white, so it's easy to see when they turn yellow. But as somebody's liver continues to fail and they get worse and worse and worse, their entire skin will start to take on more of a sickly pale yellow color as well. Okay, so that covers our introduction to blood.